Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Brazos Valley, or Brazos UU for short. My name is Carolyn Clark, and it's my privilege to be your worship assistant this morning. I come to this church because in it I find a community that supports my values and that calls me to live those values more intentionally. We are a welcoming congregation, which means we celebrate and welcome all people of diverse sexual orientations and gender identities. We also strive to welcome people across diversities of race, age, ability, immigration status, and belief. So whoever you are, wherever you have come from, wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. We encourage everyone to visit our website, brazos-uu.org. During this time of pandemic, and in the midst of our planned building project, the website and our weekly services are our church home. If you might like to contribute your musical talents, if you have a great story to share about your life's journey, or if you have a passion for social justice, we would love to hear from you. If you are interested in getting involved, you can find opportunities on our website. To learn more about our community and what is happening, you can join our email list and our monthly newsletter. And you can also find us on social media by searching UUCBV. Our service today is about cancel culture. As a covenantal people, we believe that the way we treat one another matters, and that holding people accountable for what they do is important. We'll investigate consequences, cancel culture itself, and how we are together.
Our call to worship today is by the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker. She writes, "Even when our hearts are broken by our own failure or the failure of others cutting into our lives, even when we have done all we can and life is still broken, there is a universal love that has never broken faith with us and never will."
Thank you, Reverend Christian. I invite you to light your own chalice, if you have one, as I light our chalice today. Please say our chalice lighting words with me. We light the chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, as a beacon of hope for all who seek justice, dignity, and compassion, and in celebration of the life of truth and meaning we share together. Now, please join me in saying our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its gift. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
When the Spirit says do, you gotta do. Oh Lord, you gotta do. When the Spirit says do. 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 You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you gotta sing. Oh Lord, you gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. 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 You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. When the Spirit says dance, you gotta dance. Oh Lord, you gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. 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 You gotta laugh when the Spirit says laugh. You gotta laugh when the Spirit says laugh. When the Spirit says laugh, you gotta laugh. Oh Lord, you gotta laugh when the Spirit says laugh. 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 You gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. You gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. When the Spirit says shout, you gotta shout. Oh Lord, you gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. 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 You gotta do when the Spirit says do. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do. Oh Lord, you gotta do when the Spirit says do. 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 Spirit says do.
Our time for all ages today is a little bit of a recipe. It's written by my friend, the Reverend Margaret Weiss. Now, this recipe has been tweaked over time, so you can adjust it as is necessary for you. And it never ends up quite the same any one time we do it anyway, so it's okay. Sometimes it yields more servings than you thought it might, and sometimes it needs a little bit more of this ingredient or that. It comes from all the generations that have gone before us, and we've added our own flavors along the way. This is a recipe for resilience. Now to start, we take 1 part courage, 2 parts tears of failure and doubt. We'll add in 1 part deep listening, and then 1 part each of both silence and laughter. There's a dash of trust, a pinch of wonder, and a heaping scoop of naps and snacks. Now we'll mix this together a little bit just to get it started. And then earlier, I combined in this bowl our family, our friends, those who challenge us to be our best selves. and even those with whom we disagree. So now I add slowly from our first bowl into the second, little by little, mixing it together. Now, as with many recipes, one of the tricks to this is that once you've put it together, you have to let it be. It has to prove. It needs time to do its thing. And so we're going to let it do its thing, and I'll be back in just a moment. All right, so while you were away, we did it, let it do its thing. It proved, it had time to come together. I shaped it, I put it on a pan, and now it's been cooking. You have to cook it at an even temperature, not too hot, but warm enough to make things happen. It has to be just right, and just for the right amount of time, and the only way to know that for sure is to check on it from time to time and make sure things are going well. Let's take a look. Oh, it looks so good. Now, this can be served warm like it is right now, or at room temperature, or even cold if you need to. You can serve it alongside your favorite soft blanket, dog, cat, or other soft item. You make it often, you share with others, and hold on to leftovers. You'll need them after a long day that challenges your soul. Thank you so much for listening and for cooking with me today. This has been a recipe for resilience. Please prepare yourself for our time of prayer and quiet reflection. Today's prayer is written by a dear friend of mine, the Reverend Robin Tanner. It's called A Blessing for Risk Takers and Failures. She writes, "Today we share in a blessing for losers, risk takers, all failures far and wide. Blessed are they who fall in the mud, who jump with gusto and rip the pants, who skin the elbows and bruise the ego. For they shall know the sweetness of risk. Blessed are they who make giant mistakes, whose intentions are good, but impact has injured, who know the hot sense of regret and ask for mercy. For their hearts will know the gift of forgiveness. Blessed are they who have seen a D or an F or a C, or any letter less than perfect, who are painfully familiar with the red pen and the labels as less than. For they know the wisdom in the imperfect. Blessed are they who try again, who dust off, who wash up, who extend the wish for peace, who return to sites of failure, who are dogged in their pursuit. For they will discover the secret to dreams. Blessed are they who refuse to listen to the naysayers, for their hearts will be houses for hope. Blessed are they who see beyond the surface of another, for they will be able to delight in the gift of compassion. Blessed are they who stop running the race to help a fellow traveler, who pick up the fallen, who stop for injured life, for they shall know the kindness of strangers. Blessed are they who wildly, boldly abandon winning, for they shall know the path of justice." Please join me in a time of quiet reflection. Amen. Each week we take a time in our service to share those joys and sorrows, concerns and milestones most on our hearts and minds. If you have something to share, please do so at any time in the chat box so that we may all share with you. We lift up all of those affected by the pandemic, which is all over our world, affecting billions. We lift up those who are directly affected by the virus and those who care for them, those whose lives have been turned upside down, those who have lost jobs, those whose jobs are so different than they could have imagined just a year or so ago. We're so grateful that vaccines are continuing their rollout, that many of us have had a chance to get first doses, and that more of us will soon. For this and for all of those affected by coronavirus, we pray today. We remember in this congregation that Black lives matter, and we strive for justice, equity, and anti-racism. We also strive against all kinds of hate, including that drove people to acts of violence in recent weeks. We mourn for those who are dead and support those who are missing them, and pray for a day when these senseless acts of violence will be no more. For these concerns, and for all those we didn't lift up but hold nonetheless in our hearts, we pray this day we support one another, we give thanks for the joys, and we hold each other in the sorrows. If you still have something to share, please feel free to do so again by typing in the chat box so that all of us may share with you. Have you heard this term, cancel culture? It's newish, but it's a newish term for a very old practice. When people do something unpopular or offensive or just downright awful and don't want to face consequences for it. That's when they instead cry that cancel culture is out to get them. I'll explain more. You may have heard it when a celebrity or a politician says or does something controversial, or worse than controversial. But here we could mean anything from committing a crime to saying a racist word or espousing white supremacist viewpoints or misogynist ideas, or, well, the list goes on. They do this, and then people say they're upset. They say that they're done supporting that person and their work, not going to buy things from them, etc. And then that famous person, that powerful person, claims they've been canceled, that their free speech rights are being used against them, that this tendency to sideline them is both unfair and unmerited, un-American even. That's when the term comes out, cancel culture. Have we gone too far? Is it run amok? Cancel culture as in, have we all decided that person should somehow no longer exist, I guess? Now, is this really what happens? Well, sort of course. Parts of it do happen, and parts of it are skewed a little bit. Now, we all have the right to free speech in this country, but that means somewhat less than we tend to think it means. What it means is that the government, with very rare exceptions, cannot punish you for what you say. But it doesn't mean everyone else has to like what you say, and it certainly doesn't mean you won't face consequences from everyone but the government for what you say. And it doesn't mean when you say something or do something that you shouldn't do that you necessarily get to keep your job or your livelihood or your good reputation. Now, those of us who have been around for a while have heard this before. I grew up in the era of what was called political correctness. You may remember this, which was the last made-up term for people who didn't want to face consequences for their offensive behavior and language, and you still hear it sometimes. Truly, there is nothing new under the sun, to go all biblical for a moment here. Now, why does this matter? And in a word, consequences. That's why it matters. We live in a deeply interconnected world in which all of our actions have consequences for ourselves, for others. So if we do something wrong, whether we meant to or not, as an aside, my kids try this one all the time. Oh, it was an accident. I didn't mean to. It's not my fault. Well, if we keep making the same accident over and over, at some point it really is our fault. One way this is often expressed is that your impact matters more than your intent. Your feelings about what you wanted to do, what you were trying to do, are less important than the harm your actions caused. I didn't mean to hurt you is less important than the fact that you were hurt. So if we do something wrong, we should face consequences, in part just so we can do better next time. You should learn from mistakes, and consequences can help with that. Now, not all consequences, and before someone starts diving too deep into psychology and behavior, I know that there are bad consequences, there are effective consequences, there are all sorts of things, but that's a whole other sermon, a book, a library even. And the thing is, we do have real examples of canceling. We don't have to go far. There were the anti-communist blacklists of the 1950s, in which hundreds of entertainers were denied work because of either real or imagined ties to communism. Comes to my mind. There's the systematic denial of opportunities to Black people and other racial groups over and over again in this country. Jackie Robinson was the first Black baseball player in the major leagues, but there were many, many before him who were effectively canceled. They were prevented from opportunities to play in the major leagues, where they could have made more money, they could have had more fame. These are just two examples of almost limitless ones. And so you might ask, how do I know whether this canceling thing is real or if it's just somebody crying it out? My quick answer is that you should ask who is doing the canceling. Is it someone in power? Was it the powers that be in the major leagues preventing Black players? That's probably real canceling. Is it the government, ours or someone else's? That's probably real canceling. The entertainment professionals in the 1950s weren't making this up. They faced real and undeserved consequences for their supposed political leanings or connections. You might be familiar with the blacklisting in the 1950s in part because of native Australite John Henry Falk, who was a radio personality who sued a corporation that had worked to blacklist him. He ultimately won, and he essentially broke the blacklist system in the early 1960s. That's what canceling, to the degree it exists, is. But if the canceling is the result of large groups of people, we might say the public as a shorthand, then it's not canceling. It's just that most people don't agree with you. And you can either decide whether that matters enough for you to change or not. When the comedian Louis C.K. is canceled because of inappropriate sexual behavior over the course of years and many, many times, he isn't canceled. It's just that people and corporations don't want to be associated with him anymore. If fans aren't interested in what you're offering because of your actions, that's not canceling. That's just the market making a decision about you. Business people in our society love the free market until it's suddenly not working for them, I've noticed. And of course, there's that other thing that frustrates me. If you're in the media or still using your huge Twitter following or whatever else to spread the idea that you've been canceled, well, you haven't actually been canceled then. People who have actually been canceled don't get on the TV or in the news. Again, ask all those people who were blacklisted in the 1950s, some of whom didn't work in Hollywood ever again or not for years. So if cancel culture isn't real, what are we doing and what should we be doing? I'm going to call it consequence culture. Because in short, the cancel culture isn't real. Consequence culture certainly is, and it should be. You should face consequences for your behavior, good consequences or bad consequences. Consequences, or to give another term, feedback, is how we live in society, how we negotiate the often difficult web of relationships in our lives. Now, as I alluded to earlier, there's a whole field of work about what effective consequences are. There's rewards and punishments, positive and negative reinforcement, etc. And I'm only the tiniest bit aware of this and not remotely qualified to talk about what are good consequences, or bad ones for that matter. But I know that in our world, consequences are rarely fair and often ineffective. So I know that we can do better. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that our justice and incarceration systems are riddled with unfair and ineffective consequences. The people who face the most severe consequences are disproportionately Black, other people of color, immigrants, LGBTQ, and poor, or some combination of those things. The prison system is so globally failing at what we're often told is its primary mission, rehabilitation, that it's scarcely know where to begin. But you might start with the excellent book, The New Jim Crow. And so a real consequence culture has to be a fair and equitable one, which is not what we have, but I think what we could have. But we can go a step further, at least in some parts of our lives. In our congregation, for instance, we go that step further. Yes, we have expectations and we have consequences, but most importantly, we articulate these in what we know as covenant, or covenants, actually, multiple. We think it's important to be clear about our expectations. So here we have a way of treating one another. We are open and accepting, but not of intolerance. You can think a lot of things and be a member of our congregation, but you cannot think that some people are innately more worthy or deserving than others. You can't actively work to oppress other people. And you are called to think about the ways your actions directly or indirectly contribute to systemic oppression, which is so subtle and insidious that none of us are truly innocent, but all of us are called to do better. Covenant requires not just expectations of how we will act, but expectations of what we will do when we have failed. It calls us to remain in relationship, to acknowledge the hurt we've caused, to attempt to heal that hurt, and to know that we will have to do that process over and over again because we're humans who fail from time to time. Covenant requires more of us, but not more than we're capable of. And it also offers support. None of us are in this alone. We support each other. We have a framework to return to. And we have the love of others always around us. So friends, cancel culture is just a talking point for people who don't want to face richly deserved consequences. Don't fall for it. We are instead called to do better. Perhaps to consequence culture, though we can do better at that, but more to the degree it's possible in our various communities, to covenant, to a culture that values the way we are together and gives us ways, even when we fail at that, to come back in. We're called to more, and we can do it. May all of us do our very best to do that.
Dona nobis pacem pacem, dona nobis pacem.
Dona nobis pacem, dona nobis pacem, dona nobis pacem pacem, dona nobis pacem, dona nobis pacem pacem, dona nobis pacem.
We're doing something a little different this week with the reading after the sermon. I wanted to share these words with you because they're just such a perfect summation of what I wanted to say this week. This is from We Will Not Cancel Us and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice by Adrienne Marie Brown. I have a vision of movement as sanctuary, not a tiny perfectionist utopia behind miles of barbed wire and walls, fences and tests and judgments and righteousness, but a vast sanctuary where our experiences as humans who have experienced and caused harm are met with centered, grounded invitations to grow. In this sanctuary, we feel victory, where winning means a mass and intimate healing, where winning isn't measured by anyone else's loss, but by breaking cycles of abuse, harm, assault, and systemic oppression, where winning is measured not just by the absence of patterns of harm, distrust, and isolation, but by the presence of healing and healthy interdependence, where we are skilled at being honest, setting and honoring boundaries, giving and receiving apologies, asking for help, and changing our behaviors, where every day we can access the feeling of ease in our guts and calm in our jaws and shoulders, where we have trust deep enough to grow from conflict, trust that good intentions can yield good practice and radically reduce, even eliminate harm, where we trust that we are in such regular practice that we no longer have to be vigilant to police or punish within our communities. Holding this vision inside of movements right now has meant feeling not just for what is punitive, but for where there is gleeful othering, revenge, or punishment of others, particularly when these things deepen our belonging to each other, usually briefly, until we mess up. It means paying attention to where we feel and or practice policing and surveillance outside of the state. It has meant longing for more collective clarity on what we mean by conflict, what we mean by harm, and what we mean by abuse. We need to get more precise about the language we use collectively. It has meant listening for what healing is needed and how we can become a generation that learns to be satisfied in our healing. It has meant slowing down our initial collective reactions such that violence is not met with more violence, but with alternative and satisfying consequences that result in the reduction of harm. It has meant feeling for what is out of alignment with abolition, for what feels like transformative justice, for what feels like radical love in action. In order for our movements to be rooted in love, we need to be able to have conversations as survivors, thinkers, workers, shapers of our future, where all of our experiences feed our learning. Abolition is the idea that resonates the most to me, both as a survivor who wants to break cycles of harm and as a human who wants to belong to my species, to my planet, to my time in the journey of evolution. It is our time and responsibility to try something else. And thus ends our reading.
If we were having worship service in person, this is the time when we would pass the basket. This church shares the proceeds of the offering plate donation every week to support important nonprofit organizations with which we work. This month, we are proud to continue to support the Brazos Valley Food Bank. In this time of pandemic and economic uncertainty, the food bank is a resource to this community that is needed more than ever. Please be as generous as you can. If you wish to make an offering, you can mail your check, or for your convenience, you can donate online. On our homepage at brazos-uu.org, you can find our mailing address at the bottom, and at the top you will see a Donate Here link. In the chat box, you will see that link now. May each of us look into our hearts. How much love, how much generosity, how much faith, how much gratitude, how much hope do we find there? We give thanks for these gifts we have given, for those we receive, and for each other.
Open my heart to all that I seek. Let me be part of the love you give. Open my heart to all that I seek. Let me be part I seek. Let me be part of the love. Open my heart to all that I seek. Let me be part I seek. Let me be part of the love. Open my heart to all that I seek. Let me be part I seek. Let me be part of the love you give.
Now please join me in extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish the flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we gather together again.
Friends, don't fall for the cries of cancel culture. Instead, demand more. Demand accountability. Demand high expectations. Demand real and fair consequences. Demand more. Our worship has ended and our service begins.